Through the mayor to all of council, just confirming that it appears as though the YouTube is working.
So you're confirming it's working, or like we can get started, or you're still confirming that it's working?
Through the mayor to council, I can confirm I can see the link on the Watch Now site. So we are live streaming.
Okay, wonderful. If I can ask council to return, and we'll get going. And thank you again to our delegations in the waiting room. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's City Council meeting on Monday, April the 11th. Beginning March 1, 2022, the City of Kitchener has aligned with provincial changes to COVID-19 restrictions, and City Hall is now open for in-person services, but appointments are still being encouraged. The city remains committed to the safety of our patrons and staff and continues to facilitate electronic meeting participation for members of the public. Those people who are interested in participating in this meeting or in any future meetings can register to participate electronically by completing the online delegation registration form at www.kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation@kitchener.ca. For those who are interested in accessing the meeting live stream video, it's available at www.kitchener.ca/watchnow. Any written comments that were received prior to the commencement of this evening's meeting have been forwarded to members of council and will form part of the public record of this evening's meeting. Before we commence, I would like to apologize to our viewing audience this evening for the delay in starting. We were having some technical difficulties with our live feed of the meeting, and so the meeting was delayed while those got rectified. I want to thank you for your patience while we got to this point, as well as to that of the delegations who've been waiting in the waiting room for the meeting to start. Before we begin this meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that this evening we're gathering on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. I'd now like to invite everyone to stand as they're able for the singing of our national anthem and remind members of council to please turn off your cameras during the anthem so we don't have any awkward views. Thank you. thank you very much to the members of KW Glee for that wonderful version of our national anthem. KW Glee put that together for us for Canada Day 2020 and our virtual celebration that year in the first year of the pandemic. We'll move on now on to item number 2 in the agenda, on motion by Councillor Debbie Chapman, the minutes of the regular meeting held March 21st, 2022, and the special meetings held March 21st, 28th, and April 4th, as mailed to the mayor and councillors, be accepted. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. I have a conflict in the Community Services Committee meeting on item 7.1.d, and it's because I work for a non-for-profit with affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Michaud.
I too have a conflict with that item as well, because I work for a not-for-profit in affordable and supportive housing as well.
Okay, thank you to both of you. Just a reminder to file the appropriate paperwork with the city clerk, and we will make sure that we exclude you in the voting on that item when that comes up. Number 4, communications referred to file. Council will find 3 flag raisings that have been approved. There are no presentations, and so we'll now move into delegations as listed on the agenda. I want to remind delegations that they have 5 minutes to make their presentation. I'd also like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. You'll be made a panelist prior to your name being called. Once you've joined the meeting as a panelist, you'll have access to your microphone and camera. Please leave your video camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you're called upon to speak. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting, interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations: please do not take offense in following your presentation. There are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. We'll now move on to item 6.1 and our first delegation, which is pertaining to the Compass Kitchener annual work plan. And I'd like to welcome Judy Stevens-Wells, the chair of Compass Kitchener, who will provide a 5-minute presentation to present the Compass Kitchener annual work plan. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here to speak on behalf of Compass Kitchener, presenting our 2022 work plan. And to put the plan in a little bit of context, I wanted to highlight a few accomplishments from 2021. The first item was carrying out and finalizing the strategic plan evaluation. And you'll recall we reported to council on that in December. The second item was a virtually held meeting of all the advisory committees that the city has serving. That was held in May of 2021, and that focused on strategic plan evaluation and looking at areas of collaboration with respect to implementation of the plan. And the last item was just to note really that we have had since January of 2021, 8 new members that we have welcomed and onboarded to Compass Kitchener. Looking at our work plan for 2022, we have a few key priorities. The first is the Citizens Report Card, and that's the evaluation that we'll do of the 2019 to 2022 strategic plan implementation. That'll be our focus in the fall of 2022. The second area will be the fostering of communication and collaboration amongst all the city's advisory committees. And this will be accomplished through 2 meetings. One will be held on May the 4th, a meeting of all the chairs and vice chairs of the city's advisory committees. And at that meeting, we will focus on introducing the city's new equity advisory committee so that all the advisory committees are aware of and learn more about the work that's being done by that committee. And also sharing information and gathering feedback on the Environics survey and also the public engagement activities that are being held as part of the development of the strategic plan. And the third area that we'll focus on is work that relates to the development of the city's 2023 to 2026 strategic plan. And on that, we'll be working with staff, providing input with respect to the Environics survey, which we've already done, monitoring the results, which we're about to do starting later this week, providing input into the development of the public engagement activities and participating in implementation of those activities, recommending to council community priorities, and that will happen in late summer, and developing criteria that Compass Kitchener will use in evaluating and the progress on implementation of the strategic plan. The new strategic plan, as you know, we've come to council with our criteria in the past. We will come forward with criteria for the new strategic plan. That's something we will work on in the fall, and hopefully again, we'll be conferring with CLT as part of that process. We found it was really helpful as we developed our last set of criteria and would like to do the same as we look forward to the new plan. You have a slide before you that sets out the sequence and timing of the various tasks that I've just described to you. And I guess at this point, I would say we would welcome any feedback that council has with respect to our work plan and any questions that you may have about it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Judy. And we've had the privilege of spending some time with you on a few occasions recently. And I just, again, want to reiterate in this public forum, our thanks to you and in fact to the entire Compass Kitchener committee for your commitment to this work and your passion for our community. It's, as I've said many times, we have a very unique process here in the city that isn't just council or just staff driven. But in fact, that is very much driven by a citizen-appointed committee, and I think it actually serves this community well and is a model for others. So thank you so much for this. Are there any questions for Judy? Okay, there being none. I'm wondering if someone can that would be who's bringing that forward. That is coming from Finance Committee, I think. So Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
So it's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Scott Davey that we approve the work plan.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? If not, those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried unanimously. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Judy. And again, thanks for your patience while we solved our technical difficulties.
No problem. Great to see you all this evening. Thank you.
Likewise. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Okay, now we will now go on to item 6.2. And that's Kitchener's contribution to the Canada Target 1 protected areas. And I'll invite our Manager of Forestry and Natural Areas Management, Josh Shea, to introduce our delegation on this item, which is who is Jackie Ho from Ontario Nature. So Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic, and good evening to you, members of council. I'm very pleased to be able to join you this evening, and I'm here tonight on behalf of my colleague and report co-author Carrie Musselman and her team from the Planning Division, as well as members from the Parks and Cemeteries Division. Together, we're very excited to be able to celebrate the outcome of a recent partnership with Ontario Nature, which successfully qualified protected areas in Kitchener towards Canada's Target 1 protected areas. This accomplishment speaks to Kitchener's strong planning policies and the many collaborative efforts which have taken place to date in order to protect natural areas in Kitchener. Collectively, as you're aware, these efforts ensure we have protected natural areas which contribute to the conservation of urban biodiversity and provide countless benefits to our community. I appreciate being given the opportunity to welcome and introduce Jackie Ho. Jackie is the Protected Places Coordinator for Ontario Nature and has been our lead partner throughout this process. She's graciously offered to join us tonight to provide an overview, a little bit more information about the Target 1 Protected Areas program, and also to bring congratulations to the City of Kitchener for this accomplishment. I'd like to now welcome and give Jackie the opportunity to share and also offer that staff are available should any questions arise. Thank you and welcome to Jackie.
Welcome, Jackie. The floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. I do have a slide deck. Yes. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. I'm happy to be invited here to share this project's successes with you all. I'm here on behalf of Ontario Nature, and in early 2021, I had the opportunity to help 5 municipalities and 2 conservation authorities assess some of their lands towards Canada's protected areas target, which I will briefly summarize now. Next slide, please. To begin, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, Ontario Nature is a charitable conservation organization representing many members and member groups across Ontario. We have a strong background in science, policy, and advocacy and have been around since 1931. Our programs include managing nature reserves across the province, community science, youth education, boreal projects, and a protected places campaign. Next slide. The context for the protected areas target we are talking about today starts at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. From 2011 to 2020, there were a set of biodiversity targets agreed to internationally, including one to protect 17% of lands and waters by 2020. In Canada, this translated to an initiative called the Pathway to Canada Target 1. Over the last few years, the federal government has ramped up investments into protected areas and nature conservation as a result, and in 2020 announced that they were extending this target to become 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. Next slide. As of today, Canada has reached about 14% of area protected. However, in Ontario, not as many significant strides have been made, and we remain at 10.7% protected. But there are some missing pieces. In Ontario, the landscape of private lands and municipalities, especially in the south, means that there is conservation work being done that isn't being recognized or reported federally. Next slide. This project, which was supported by Environment and Climate Change Canada with technical input from Ontario's Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, had the goal to assess a broad swath of municipal lands in Southern Ontario to see what could or couldn't count towards the national standards. Ontario Nature reached out to a few municipalities we thought had strong environmental policies, including the City of Kitchener. For sites to qualify as either a protected area or a conserved area, they had to meet these general criteria. They must have clearly defined boundaries, effective means to control activities that may negatively impact biodiversity. Protection should be long-term, year-round, and difficult to reverse, and they should be managed to achieve positive conservation outcomes. Next slide. This slide outlines the process over the last couple of years. The sites were submitted to Ontario's MECP for review in March of 2021. They were reviewed last November and December, and the sites were entered into CPCAD, the Federal Protected Areas Database, this January. Next slide. Here are the 5 municipalities that Ontario Nature worked with successful outcomes. It was really interesting for us to learn more about the different relationships between municipalities and conservation authorities in different areas, as some of the sites are jointly managed. Ontario Nature and the partner municipalities looked at natural heritage system policies, city park plans, environmentally significant areas, and similar designations to see what could qualify. We had to consider different overlapping layers of policies that apply to land uses and what could be considered long-term protection for biodiversity. Next slide, please. In Kitchener, we filtered for parks that were fully designated as natural heritage conservation in your official plan above a certain size, and then gathered all of the plans and policies that pertain to their management. This table quickly breaks down the main criteria in the assessment tool and how Kitchener met each of them. In this round of assessments, I found that Kitchener uniquely had very strong language in your official plan around the long-term intent of managing your natural heritage system. And the systematic approach the city has to managing the NHS sites made it straightforward to assess multiple sites all at once. Next slide, please. These are the 20 sites that qualified in Kitchener for a total of 585 hectares. In our work, we also found that your open mapping data of the areas were really helpful, particularly your mapping of ecosystem types at each site. Kitchener's investments into site-specific management plans and collection of survey data where available were also immensely helpful to have. Next slide. So to conclude, I want to congratulate the city for this success. You are certainly a great example for other municipalities to look up to in terms of investing in the conservation of your natural areas. If anyone has any further questions, I'm happy to answer them, and this is my contact information. I really want to thank the city for taking part in this great initiative and to your lovely staff that supported this work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Jackie, for joining us this evening on behalf of Ontario Nature. I want to thank you for and your organization for the work you're doing across the province, and want to use this opportunity to also acknowledge Josh and all of our team here at the city for their leadership and the great work they're doing in this space as well. We do have some questions for you, and we'll begin with Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this report. I was just wondering what role the different Indigenous communities had in the process.
Thanks, Councillor Chapman. In Ontario, at least as far as I'm aware, the assessment process so far has not included any Indigenous engagement or assessments of Indigenous protected and conserved areas. There has been more efforts federally to establish IPCAs and to work with Indigenous communities, but none, as far as I'm aware, in the province of Ontario so far.
And is it in your bigger picture? Is that something that will be included or not?
So Ontario Nature, as a charitable organization, we do include Indigenous engagement in a lot of our efforts, especially in our nature reserves program and in our protected places campaign. But we do not make decisions or can't really influence the actions of the province. And so we would really love to see the province take more action in including Indigenous-led conservation in their management of natural areas.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Next up, I have Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic, and thank you so much, Jackie and Josh, for this presentation tonight. It's really exciting. I couldn't wait for the unveiling to see kind of what the different areas were that you had chosen to work with in the city. So I'm really excited to see places like Lakeside Park on there. So that's really great. So I wanted to do a special shout out actually to Josh, who I know works after hours working with our community groups and that in neighborhood associations in those areas. So thank you. So my question, Jackie, is I'm wondering, how do we now take the work that you're doing? I love all the signage and everything. Is there kind of an education component that we can be sharing with our neighborhood groups in areas about what you've done here and how they can learn more and perhaps how they can participate and volunteer with this as well?
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. And I agree. I had a great time working with your staff. And I think Kitchener is pretty uniquely situated in terms of municipalities putting so much investment into natural areas. Ontario Nature has put out a couple public communications about this project. We have a blog up on our website that people can read more about the process. And there's also an official Canada website, Conservation 2020 Canada, where people can learn more about this process federally. Locally, I believe the City of Kitchener has really great mapping for people that want to see where the natural areas are. That's one of the maps that I use in this assessment, and I think it's on the Natural Areas Program webpage. So maybe you can encourage your constituents to look there. Otherwise, Ontario Nature is always willing and happy to have more volunteers for people who want to see more of what we do. But I think your staff might be better suited to direct people.
Yeah,
to
and maybe the
international areas.
question would be better to go to Josh then, but that's great. And Josh, I don't know if you have any comments as well.
Josh, did you want to add something?
Sure, I will. I appreciate the question or the comment, and through you, Mayor Verbanovic, I think there's lots of opportunities to share this, and it will become part of our natural areas program and shared through our educational events and programs, but and definitely content on the website as a starting point, but there's always opportunities to continue to celebrate and share this information. So we'll look for ways and opportunities to do that going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's great. I mean, groups like the Friends of Lakeside Park, and they just celebrated 100 years of birding in the park, bird watching in the park. So very, very dedicated volunteers and naturalists there who I'm sure would love to participate more with this program. So thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Davey, you're up next.
Thank you. Just one question, and I really appreciate the presentation. From your perspective, Ms. Ho, I'm not sure if this is outside of your expertise, but I'm trying to understand from our municipal role what the biggest threats are to the preservation, the conservation of these lands.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that's a really good question. There are definitely multiple kind of ecological factors that can be affecting natural areas. I think the management of recreational impacts, invasive species, and just threats to biodiversity, including climate change and habitat loss. All of those things really come to a head in urban areas. And so Kitchener's role in kind of maintaining your natural heritage systems and your valley lands along the Grand River and any significant natural areas, as you have done, is really important for keeping biodiversity conserved in urban areas. So I don't have any more specific responses, but in general, in Southern Ontario, I think it's pretty unique for the Waterloo region to have kept such a large percentage of green space for residents.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Councillor Davey. And Jackie, that appears to be all of the questions. So again, thank you very much for your work and for joining us this evening. This is certainly exciting. And Josh, again, thank you to you and the team for the great work you're doing on behalf of forestry and natural areas here in the city of Kitchener. I don't believe there's any motion coming out of this, so we'll move on to the next item. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is 6.3, Center in the Square, scheduled performance. I will alert council to the fact that we've received 2 formal written submissions from Craig Reynolds and Kevin White. Before we hear from our delegations, I just wanted to share the following. Thank you and welcome to those residents who are delegating this evening regarding the upcoming Live Nation event at Center in the Square, as well as those who have shared their views with us ahead of tonight's meeting through our clerk's office or other communications. Before we begin, I'd like to reiterate points made in a response shared publicly by the City of Kitchener and myself when we first learned about this show being booked. First and foremost, the upcoming Jordan Peterson show is a rental arrangement between the Center in the Square and Live Nation and is part of a larger tour that includes neighboring cities such as London and Hamilton. To be unequivocally clear, this is a rental by Live Nation, and the performer in question was not invited to bring their show to the Center by the City of Kitchener, this council, nor to my knowledge by the staff or board of the Center in the Square. The Center in the Square is an arm's length organization that is governed by a separate board of directors and operated independently of the city. While members of council sit on the board of the Center in the Square, as they do on many not-for-profit boards throughout our community, when doing so, those members' fiduciary responsibilities rest completely with those organizations and are separate from those they have to the city as members of council. And like other third-party or arm's length facilities that receive funding from the city, council does not have the authority or jurisdiction to direct the operation of those organizations or facilities, as they don't with the Center in the Square. Having said this, we recognize that there is a significant public interest in this facility rental and believe strongly in the fundamental right for citizens to speak directly to elected officials on the issues that matter most to them. And so, while we cannot step outside of our roles and obligations as elected officials to direct action at the Center in the Square, we can ensure that the voices of those who are historically oppressed, marginalized, and silenced are heard. As a city, we can also work with community partners in response to events in our community. As such, since the early days of learning of the rental in question, both staff and myself have communicated and are working with members of the community about a variety of ideas as well as options to support impacted members of our community, including a willingness to support a community-led alternative event and the introduction of a trans swim program. That dialogue continues, and we hope to have more to say on that in the days and weeks ahead. On behalf of council, I'd like to again thank those of you delegating tonight for taking the time to share your thoughts with City Council. And with that, I'll open the floor to our first delegation. Our first delegation this evening is David Alton. Welcome, David.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you for that statement that clarifying kind of certain stances and positions. Thank you for creating space tonight to listen to the public and reconsider the current handling of the Center in the Square's booking policy and their approach to the booking of Jordan Peterson. I'm here tonight to amplify the calls to action in acting out Waterloo Region's public letter, alongside the call to reopen the contract for those of you who are able to, and intervene so that the show and its associated transphobia is not platformed by a public agency that receives city funding in our community. To do nothing and say the contract is signed or hands are tied is unacceptable, given the speaker's long history of harm towards trans people and racialized people. To give you a sense of the impact of this speaker on our community already, let me walk you through what my family has been experiencing. In January, I delegated to the school board about the importance of including trans and queer books in libraries. In response, I received over 700 hate messages, mocking my appearance and calling me a pedophile, a rapist, and a threat to children. Peterson directed his followers to harass myself and other queer activists trying to protect queer and racialized children at the school board. To this day, screenshots of my queer racialized partner are frequently posted to Peterson's Twitter page, encouraging him to direct further harassment to my family. And to be clear, my partner did not delegate, and their account is private. There are many other people in our community who are currently being harassed by Peterson and his followers, including teachers, equity workers, and even our MPP, who is in the firing line for their bill on racial equity in schools. Tonight, the school board is dealing with another evening of transphobic comments and racist comments. We do not need Peterson coming to our community and mobilizing this movement of hate further. To say your hands are tied is not accurate. There's always a way to update or break your contract to cancel an event, and there is always a role for the city to make a statement or to use the tools at your disposal. To assist with this, I'm calling on, for those of you who are able, to publicly denounce Peterson and to open the contract up to further legal support to assist you in finding the best legal tool to cancel it. A tool that has been used at Wilfrid Laurier University is to require the security costs be transferred to the speaker, so it's no longer in their financial interest for them to come. I know that there are many trans, queer, and racialized community members who could use security right now to help them manage the harassment they are experiencing because of Peterson's impending arrival. Your legal team can also make demands of Live Nation, who have caused this harm, by combining Peterson's tour within their events package. I've heard that the reason we have not had any public statement or action yet is because there is a fear of being sued by Peterson. If this is true, it is a pity that your support of marginalized community members can be undermined by the threats of one angry rich white man. Everyone who is delegating tonight is risking their safety to tell you about Peterson and his many harms. There's a high chance his supporters will harass them, dox them, or worse. It was not safe for many folks to come tonight or to make public remarks leading up to tonight. So please take leadership, be public about your displeasure, and explore your options. Being sued shouldn't stop you from protecting your community. If you support trans rights, if you want to be an ally, we need you standing not just beside us in our harassment. You have the power to stand in front of us and prevent another wave of harassment from entering our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for coming in. We do have one question for you, Councillor Marsh.
I don't actually have a question. I just want to thank you so much for your bravery and for coming forward tonight, despite what you have gone through so far. And yeah, I applaud you for your work. And let's continue the dialogue.
Thanks, Councillor Marsh. David, there don't appear to be any other questions, so I too want to thank you for coming in and sharing so eloquently with us your experience with respect to this issue and for council to give it full consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, our next delegation is Craig Reynolds.
Good evening.
Welcome, Craig.
Thank you. I'd like to thank council for allowing me to speak in opposition of the event in Center in the Square. I would like to start off first by saying a brief content warning. There will be mentions of misogyny, transphobia, and hate speech as we go through. So before we begin, I would like to point out the irony that I'm here to delegate to you a topic which council and Center in the Square is currently permitting, which content from it's not even appropriate for the expected decorum and conduct for this meeting, specifically derogatory statements of councillors, staff, and others, as well as hate speech and defamatory comment. With that, let's begin. So who is Jordan Peterson? He's a clinical psychologist and ex-professor, social media personality, and author, which is the reason why Peterson is speaking at Center in the Square. Why is he so famous? Initially made infamous by misreading Bill C-16, a bill which affirmed protections for transgender people. He was corrected in public response by the courts, which rarely ever happens. And right-wing media gave Peterson multiple interviews to platform his opinions on this, and he continued misreading Bill C-16 even after being corrected. Since then, he's went on many podcasts and media programs aimed at young white men, such as the Joe Rogan Experience, to further his own media career. He started collaborating with Ben Shapiro, a well-known right-wing political grifter with a primarily white male audience covering topics such as thoughts on transgenderism, a topic whose title is already transphobic. And he recently has begun to publicly fight against Bill C-67, which was introduced by our very own Kitchener Centre MPP. So you might ask, who's the intended audience for this show? And the answer is anxious white men who are looking for an explanation or person to blame for their problems. Examples are the neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, North Carolina, chanting, "The Jews will not replace us," followers of the Canadian terrorist organization, the Proud Boys, and recently the American young adult who illegally crossed state lines with a gun and ended up shooting dead multiple people at a BLM rally. And some of you might say, it's just a book. Well, is it really? Let's ask some questions. If Peterson is such a great author, then why is he known more for his media appearances and Twitter comments, specifically the ones that are transphobic and against anti-racism? What is Peterson really teaching these young men who are his audience, and what impressions is he giving them to his frustrations? How can we believe a man who wrote a book called Our Carnivore Diet, How to Cure Depression and Disease with Meat Only? In fact, we should probably listen to what he has to say. Peterson, on working with women, from an interview with TVO, stated, "If I'm in a mixed gender discussion group, I have to basically remove about 90% of myself, because if I was who I am, the discussion wouldn't even get off the ground. I have to rein myself in and be so polite with the women I work with." In an interview with Vice, Peterson had an interaction with a reporter. "We don't know where the rules are. Like what? Here's a rule. How about no makeup in the workplace?" The interview asks, "Why would that be a rule?" Peterson replies, Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative? Interview replies, no. Peterson continues, it's not. What is it then? What is the purpose of makeup? And the interview continues, some people would like to just put on makeup. Peterson interrupts him by saying, why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason. Peterson also comments that women are choosy. One of the thing, and I quote, one of the many things about human beings that's unique is the human females are picky maters. They're choosy. They're also sneaky because you can't tell when they're ovulating. And with many other female animals, you know, they have hidden ovulation and they're choosy, and they tend to choose men who are more successful in the dominance hierarchy. So how about we start putting that all together? We've got a strapping young lad named Bob. Bob's heard about Jordan Peterson, decided to come see him at Center in the Square. He meets all the fans, goes, even follows Peterson on Twitter and watches on YouTube. He learns a lot from this other material. He learns he must contain 90% of himself around women. He learns that women, including the ones on city council who wear makeup and heels, are trying to lead him around and trying to get him going sexually, implying what immoral and bad women they must be to do such a thing. Bob learns that women are just playing games with him constantly, and they're extremely picky when it comes to picking a partner. Are you seeing a common thread here? How many more threads are like this with Jordan Peterson? Around gender, around race. We already know the thread of transphobia is there. How many more Bobs will be created by this show in Kitchener? We already know the show is sold out with over 2,000 seats. And will any of these future Bobs escalate their behavior? Perhaps feel angry enough at a woman to drive a van down a street running over pedestrians like we saw in Toronto in 2018? To violently beat a potential partner when denied his romantic advance? Why risk it? So my ask here is to prevent harm from happening now, from happening in the future. And if you can't do either, look at each woman, staff member, female counselor in the eyes and proudly say, this is what we should be teaching young men and that this is okay.
Thank you, Craig, for coming in this evening and making your presentation and sharing your views with council.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Craig? There don't appear to be any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Graham Rowe. Good evening. Welcome, Graham.
Hello, thank you. I just want to thank the mayor and council for allowing me to speak. I'm asking Kitchener Council to take a strong stand to protect Kitchener's vulnerable citizens from the harm that will come from the Jordan Peterson event this May. I want to encourage Kitchener Council to find reasons to protect its citizens, to find reasons to uninvite Jordan Peterson from hosting an event in our city. Jordan Peterson is known for his hateful views regarding gender identity, denying people their choice of pronouns, and more recently his opposition to anti-racism education programming in our schools. An event with Jordan Peterson will also serve to embolden the hateful views that reside within our community. A clear and recent example of the harm that can be seen in the aftermath of Jordan Peterson's recent YouTube video. It was on March 11th, 2022, and it was entitled Warning Bill 67, where he personally called out our local MPP, Laura May Lindo, who then received racist abuse within comments on the video itself and on Twitter. We don't want to see this harm repeated in our community, whether it be physical or virtual, in the lead up and aftermath of the Jordan Peterson event. Just to remind how vulnerable some of our citizens are, 2S LGBTQ+ youth face approximately 14 times the risk of suicide and substance abuse than their heterosexual peers. When they have one accepting adult, they are 40% less likely to attempt suicide. Our role in protecting our youth is even heightened by the intersectionality of the groups targeted by Jordan Peterson. It multiplies the harm on our friends, neighbors, family members, and children. As a community, let's protect against harm that will come with this Jordan Peterson event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham, for coming in and delegating this evening and for sharing your views with us on this important issue. I don't see any questions at this time, so thank you very much, sir. Our last delegation this evening is William Turman. Welcome, William.
Hello, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Barry, for introducing the topic and giving that preface at the beginning. And thank you all of the delegates who have spoken on this topic before me. I hope I have something to add to the conversation. I am speaking about Peterson as an upcoming act, and I want to use this as an example of the responsibility of the city to not cause harm. And I specifically want to talk about the influence that an individual can have and does currently have over our community, and how this negatively impacts women, Black, Indigenous, and racialized people, and LGBT. By hosting Peterson in a publicly owned venue with the oversight of a public board, and not opposing that, you are legitimizing the viewpoints that Peterson espouses and which members of our communities have been actively struggling to overcome for decades. When you say that you support marginalized people in our community who are actively harmed by Jordan Peterson and people who do things in his name, and then host them in a public venue, that's a way that we break trust with these vulnerable groups, and we are exacerbating the harm that is already being done. Perfect illustration that's already been mentioned is happening currently in our school systems. Recently, there was some controversy over inclusion of books with gender diverse characters, and the LGBT community said that these books are important. They're a way that we can be represented to young people, and that's the point I agree with. Jordan Peterson and some other popular media figures tweeted about this issue, and they were simply responding with some derision to the people who were sharing their experience, which David was mentioning earlier. And hundreds or thousands of people jumped in and hurled abuse and public accusations towards those people who are sharing their marginalized voice, which council has expressed the need to hear more clearly. And what David was sharing is only one story among many. It's clear that people see Peterson as an authority, and even this tiniest shred of attention through a single tweet primes people, and it gives them permission to harass, abuse, and erase the voices within our community who are saying otherwise. Another perfect illustration within our schools, again, has to do with racism, and in which our community members' voices continue to be ignored. The Black Parent Council, KW, formed in response to outrageous racism, and recently has published 12 achievable calls to action, which have still not been addressed. Our wonderful MPP, who is also a Black parent, tabled a bill to identify racism in schools and help empower educators with tools to be anti-racist. Again, Jordan Peterson called this bill, what Craig was mentioning earlier, and I quote, "the most pernicious and dangerous piece of legislation that any Canadian government has attempted to put forward," which I will point out is absurd when you consider and you understand that Peterson is comparing this legislation to the Indian Act, a piece of Canadian legislation that mandated what many in Canada and Canadian inquiry has correctly identified as a genocide. This view, which Jordan Peterson profits from and which gets millions of views on a dozen platforms, is already heard. This view and others, I should say. Bringing that message here, having it supported in our public places, tells marginalized people in our community that they're on their own against it, despite everything you say about supporting equity in our marginalized neighbors. You don't support them in this. I could give you receipts and I could tell you exactly who has been harmed aside from who has already spoken at this meeting. And I could tell you to what extent, but again, by introducing them here in this subject, we'll only introduce them to more harm. the people who have come forward about LGBT inclusion and racism in our community, the most visible and most vulnerable people are the ones who are targeted for harassment. So I want to just state the 3 calls to action published by Acting Out WR about this event specifically. First, that the City of Kitchener should revisit and revise its agreement with the management company responsible for signing up performances and implement a code of ethics with the goal of avoiding shows that are harmful to the community, even if that harm is only apparent after they have signed a contract. That number 2, that the City of Kitchener should sponsor, support, and host a trans supportive event on the same day to provide an alternative viewpoint and show support to the community whose trust is being damaged by the city's apparent support of Jordan Peterson. And 3, to eliminate barriers to recreation for trans people, including by hosting swimming programming at public pools for trans people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William, for coming in this evening and sharing your thoughts with us. I don't see any questions from members of council. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Council, I do want to give, at this point in time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Robb. I do know that there were a number of comments made in terms of what the city may or may not be able to do in terms of dealing with this type of situation. I'm wondering if Ms. Robb can perhaps reflect on that in her comments for council's benefit.
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. Through you, first, I'd like to acknowledge that while staff do not have specific knowledge of the content of this upcoming show, we are generally aware of Mr. Peterson's content from information found in the public domain. And these views do not reflect the city's values or priorities when it comes to issues of equity and inclusivity. Live Nation's rental of the Center in the Square to host Jordan Peterson is no way an endorsement by the city of the content he presents. Despite the fact that the Center in the Square is an arm's length organization that the city has no direct oversight or control of, when staff learned of this rental at Center in the Square, we sought extensive legal advice to ensure that we fully understood council's role as it relates to the Center in the Square, and as council's role relates to upholding the rights and obligations under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Mr. Mayor, in your opening remarks, you commented on the fact that council has members sitting on the board of the Center in the Square, but they do not constitute quorum, and Kitchener City Council has no authority or mandate to direct the operations of the center. More specifically, government bodies, including municipalities, are obligated to not interfere with or deny individuals their protected rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So for council to interfere in the ability of this rental to proceed would be a denial of the performer's right to freedom of expression. And as such, any attempt to modify, censor, or cancel the Jordan Peterson performance would result in a legal challenge, would be expensive, exorbitant, and the outcome of which would be questionable. We understand and respect the perspectives we have heard here today, and I want to acknowledge the harm that members of the T2S LGBTQ+ communities have faced and continue to face through discrimination and targeted hate, as we've heard so clearly from David Alton in their delegation tonight. And as an organization and a municipal government, we know that we have a role to play in dismantling discrimination and hate. And we understand that part of doing that is listening to and responding to the needs of the Kitchener community, prioritizing the safety and well-being of those who identify as 2S LGBTQ+, and committing to building an equitable system by providing safe spaces for citizens who access services and participate in decision-making and contribute to our community. So for the things that we do have control over, we are working on making changes within our own organization and in city programs and services. So as you noted earlier, Mayor Urbanovic, one of these tangible actions is working with our aquatic staff to organize regularly scheduled trans non-binary swim times at our Kitchener pools, which was a request that came from a member of the trans community, and that work is actively underway as we speak tonight. Additionally, in November of 2021, members of Kitchener City Council unanimously supported a motion brought forward to formally denounce conversion practices as dangerous and harmful, and directed staff in our equity division to explore ways to support conversion therapy survivors and those at risk. So currently, staff in our equity division are working with members of No Conversion Canada in support of this motion, including exploring bylaw options, use of city facilities, and potential funding opportunities. These are only 2 examples, and we know that it's not enough. We know our work has just begun, and we do remain committed to that work with marginalized communities and those who experience hate.
Sorry, is that it, Ms. Rob?
That's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any comments from members of council? Councillor Davey.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to comment briefly. I'm one of the members that sits on the Center and the Square board. And I want to be clear because something that's really been bothering me through this entire process is the assertion that council or the city is somehow supporting this individual by him appearing at the Center and the Square. And all I can say is that could not be further from the truth. This is like, not to minimize it, this is less a question of support of trans rights as it is a question of freedom of expression. And that's the real issue here. And council is in a bind, and as are any public body when it comes to limiting someone's freedom of expression. Freedom of expression has a cost. Now, the cost of that is people can often be offended, people can be harmed, and it's a continuing process to figure out where that line is. But it's very, very clear from the Charter and the Human Rights Code that we cannot simply pick and choose our own values in this council against that very clear Charter and that very clear Human Rights Code. So that's the real issue that we're struggling with here. But I mean, for my part of it, I mean, in terms of the silence, you know, I and other members of council, I tweeted out on the Trans Day of Visibility my very clear beliefs in this regard. And I know my fellow members of council are very, very frustrated by this. But it's simply a freedom of expression. It's a charter issue. It's not. It's really that's what we're grappling with. Thanks.
Thanks, thanks, Councillor Davey. Are there any additional comments? If not, I just want to again thank the delegations that came in this evening, as well as those who have communicated with us ahead of this evening. As has been indicated, the views that we understand have been reflected by this individual in the past do not reflect those of this council or us as a city in terms of values and priorities when it comes to issues of equity and inclusivity. And while the difficulty and quite frankly the hurt that we know this individual does cause some individuals is a concern for us, as has been indicated. We are restricted within the responsibilities and the rights we have around the laws associated with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and other legislation. So with that, thank you again, everyone, and we'll move on to the next item in this evening's agenda. And that next item is the reports of the committees. And I'll turn the floor over to Councillor Kelly Galloway-Seelock to bring in the recommendations from Financing and Corporate Services.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Davey that items 7.1a, B, C, D, and E be approved.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
My apologies. There's an information report related to the development charges. Currently, the policy refers to the recommendation that was approved on April the 4th, and we just need the resolution amended to refer to the policy, the information report that's on the agenda of the state. So if council was amenable to the proposed changes to the policy, which were included in the agenda, then we need the resolution to be amended to reflect that report.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock, is your motion reflecting that change?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So it has been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all those in favor? Any opposed? I'm going to deal with 7.1D separately because of the conflicts that have been identified. So I'll deal with 7.1D first. All those in favor? So I'm dealing with 7.1D first. So that's the one pertain that Councillor Michaud and Councillor Ioannidis, you have conflicts on. So let's do that one again. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried with the 2 noted conflicts from Councillors Ioannidis and Michaud. The balance of 7. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And I will just note for the viewing audience that 7.1E did refer to in-person and hybrid council and committee meetings. And so we've set in a protocol for a 1-year trial in terms of moving forward with a number of things, including continuing to permit delegations to, once we resume meetings in the council chamber, to either choose to appear in person or to appear virtually. We've certainly heard that this is an important element that's benefited people, particularly older adults and young families, where sometimes coming out in the evenings can be a little more difficult. And so that will be proceeding. Tentatively right now, the first in-person meeting that we're hoping to see is council on Monday, May the 9th. But we're going to continue to monitor the direction from the province and what we're seeing locally in terms of COVID cases and so on. So with that, now I will move to item 7.2, which is the Community and Infrastructure Services Committee, and I'll turn it over to you, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks very much. In fact, I have I would like to amend item 2.5 on this agenda. And so I'd like to turn it over to my trusty vice chair to bring forward that item separately.
Okay, I will bring forward this, and we need a mover for this.
Sorry, we're dealing with 7. You said 2.5. That there's 7.
I'm sorry, you're right.
7.2 is
sorry. You cut out.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor.
I see it as 7.2E.
Okay, thank you. And that's moved by Councillor Schneider. And is there, Councillor Marsh, I take it you don't want to second it, or?
I can, if I'm able, sure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, because Councillor Marsh would like to bring forward an amendment. Procedurally, Councillor Schneider has brought forward the motion so that she can physically do the amendment, so that can be voted on separately. So if we can get a seconder that isn't Councillor Marsh, so that she can go ahead and bring forward the amendment.
Well, okay, I mean, technically, according to Robert's rules, she could actually still second, but I saw Councillor Johnson had her hand up, so Councillor Johnson has seconded it, and Councillor Marsh, if you want to bring forward your amendment.
Okay, thanks so much. So I'm just going to call it up here. All right, so at last week's meeting, I indicated that I might have an amendment to bring forward on this topic when we discussed it. It was actually just a consent item. But the thing is, it's in my ward, and it bothered me that we were being asked to approve a demolition of 2 homes without a clear redevelopment plan. So since that time, I was able to speak with staff, and finally today I was able to speak with the applicant's planning consultant, who really was unfamiliar with our processes and really had no problem with delaying the demolition, so the approval. Staff and the planning consultant are fine with correcting the timing. So I would like to propose that that we just adjust the timing of the demolition permit to follow due process. So I'll ask staff to please, oh, here it is. Okay. So basically that whereas, we have our demolition control bylaw for a reason, and that is in part to protect residential homes. And, anything could happen between now and approval of site plan. And so I'm just asking that demolition control application listed here, requesting permission to demolish 2 single detached dwellings located at 289 and 295 Sheldon Avenue North be approved as outlined in our previous report, but that they be submitted to the following condition: that the owner obtains final site plan approval, and that the owner obtains a building permit for the proposed redevelopment. And then upon satisfaction of the chief building official, that they are authorized to issue a demolition permit. It's my understanding that staff always include this condition, and we can ask staff to confirm that in the event, we always include this other caveat, apparently. So that in the event that construction of the proposed redevelopment is not substantially complete within 2 years of the date of issuance of the demolition permit, that the city clerk may enter on the collector's roll to be collected in like manner as municipal taxes, $20,000 for each dwelling unit contained in the residential properties, in respect of which the demolition permit is issued, and such sum shall, until payment thereof, be a lien or charge upon the land in respect of which the permit to demolish the residential property is issued. So I'm just, so that's it. I don't know if staff can confirm that this is the usual condition.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Marsh. Before I go to staff, is there a seconder for Councillor Marsh's amendment? Councillor Johnson, thank you. If staff want to respond to Councillor Marsh, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I can confirm that is the typical wording of the demolition control approval condition. In all cases where demolition control is delegated to staff, we do include that condition. The wording of that condition is standard. It stems from the Planning Act as well as our municipal code.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments on the amendment? Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I'm just curious then too, I'm trying to understand if it's standard internally, why wouldn't it have been included in this with us publicly?
Mr. Stevenson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are 2 options when considering a demolition control application. When it is delegated to staff, we include that standard condition. If an applicant wishes to receive demolition control without any conditions, they can receive that from council. Initially, that was the staff recommendation, which would allow for the demolition prior to the site plan approval. In conversations with Councillor Marsh and with the applicant, since the Planning and Strategic Initiatives Committee, they are in agreement that they will maintain the dwellings until such time as site plan is approved. So essentially, council is making a decision that would have the same conditions that would be applied at a staff level.
Okay, and one last quick question. Is it always 2 years at the staff level? And I guess what happens if there's something unforeseen on their side and they need to push it back? Do they have an option to push it back?
The standard wording is for 2 years. There is an ability under the Planning Act to reconsider that for extenuating circumstances. That 2-year clock does begin once site plan approval has begun. The 2-year clock is to see the redevelopment. So it is to incentivize someone to rebuild within 2 years. Oftentimes, someone would not go through the trouble of getting full site plan approval and a building permit if they weren't going to be proceeding with their project right away.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, there being no further questions or comments, I'll take the vote on that item. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That's carried. And now for the original item as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And we'll now move to the balance of the report that's been moved by Councillor Marsh and seconded by
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Although any questions or comments on that one? There being none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried as well. Thank you. We'll now move on to unfinished business. Any new business? And moving on to the regional council update. Colleagues, I think probably the main thing is to just provide a little bit of an update on a number of public health issues. You're aware there have been a series of announcements from the province recently pertaining to COVID-19. Probably the most significant is that those over the age of 60 are now eligible for a fourth dose or a booster dose. As long as 5 months have passed since their last one is the recommended interval, but as little as 3 months up to the individual. And those appointments can be booked either through the regional website, at the regional clinics that are available, through your local health provider, or through local pharmacies in the region. The province today did announce access pertaining to antivirals for the 70 and over population, and some additional details in regards to that. And all of that information can be found on the region of Waterloo website going forward. Those are the main items that I wanted to touch on this evening. And if there are no questions, we'll move on to the notice of motion. There being no questions, I'll move on to Councillor Davey for your notice of motion. And I think we'll acknowledge that this also comes from Committee of the Whole, item 12.2.a, which is honorarium for the Anti-Racism Committee. And so I think council, just urging council to have that in context as Councillor Davey brings forward his motion. So Councillor Davey, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would you prefer I read it or summarize?
Whatever your preference is, Councillor Davey.
Okay, sure. I'll read it quickly then. Whereas the city appoints citizen members to advisory and quasi-judicial committees to give advice and provide feedback to city council and standing committees on a variety of issues. Whereas residents that are appointed to advisory and quasi-judicial committees are appointed based on their expertise and experience. Whereas council values the feedback and contribution of all citizen committee members and appreciate their contribution to the public engagement process. Whereas council values the contributions and inclusion of voices of groups who have historically been underrepresented in citizen committees, as outlined by the city's equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. Whereas the current practices related to honorariums have been applied and implemented inconsistently and have never been subject to a fulsome review. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to complete a fulsome, equity-informed corporate policy for compensation for members of all City of Kitchener advisory committees and report back to council prior to the commencement of the next advisory committee term. And I'll just speak to it briefly, Mr. Mayor, if you like it.
Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, it's I see this really as just it's not a big deal. It's a missing policy that we probably should be looking at within the context of our other advisory committees. And obviously what spurred it was the honorariums for the EDI committee that's coming forward. So I just think it's fair that we give a review and make sure that we are, well, frankly, honoring all of our committee and advisory members in an equal and equitable way. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. And I see a couple of hands up. So Councillor Ioannidis, well, see several hands up. And let's focus on that we're dealing with Councillor Davey's motion now. We'll be coming to 12.1, I believe it is, shortly. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'm glad this is here. I think it's a good idea that we do a review with all our committees. So I think it's a good housekeeping process, and you know, sometimes some of the committees do have challenges attracting individuals. So maybe this will help.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand why what I missed here, because I thought that I understood that this was already on the work plan from staff. I wonder if staff can comment. Is what's new here?
I don't know who from Ms. Robb, did you want to respond?
Yep, through the mayor, it is on staff's work plan. There's actually a more comprehensive body of work that will be undertaken in terms of nominating committee process, et cetera, through an equity lens. And so this is really to get it in the public domain and make sure that there's transparency around the work ahead of us in terms of this particular project.
So is there anything different? Like, is this timeline aligned with the plan that you already had in mind?
Yes, this timeline is consistent with what we had planned for the more fulsome review.
Okay. Well, thank you, Councillor Davey, for bringing forward into the public sphere what we already had in the work plan. I do appreciate that now members of the public will be aware that this is happening, but I don't see any problem with supporting it because it's already happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Gazzola.
Sorry, point of clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Davey.
Just checking with staff, were honorariums in the work plan? Because I don't believe that they were.
Ms. Robb or Mr. May?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, what I would say is that like so much of this EDI work, staff has every intention of looking at this. Council's never taken a position that it is a priority and should be fully built into the work plan. And so I think this is just formalizing one of the pieces that staff knew needed to be done.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I'm having some problems with this resolution. We have two opposing things being dealt with here tonight. Here we're approving a study to take place, which is well and good. And later on, we're going to approve something with very little transparency, I must add. But we're approving something that's as if the study has already taken place. And I can't vote for both of them. One of them has to take place before the other. And, I don't think the direction we're going in is fair and equitable. We should do the study first and then make the decision. But the way we're going tonight, we're going to approve the study and we're also going to approve the decision. So I just don't quite follow it.
Thanks for those comments, Councillor Gazzola. Just for clarity, the issue that we'll be dealing with under Committee of the Whole is a follow-up to a recommendation that was in place when we originally formed the EDI committee. This motion that Councillor Davey is bringing forward is really looking at the broader issue of all of our committees beyond the EDI committee, and saying that we need to look at the rest of the issue, and that's exactly the piece of work that's being contemplated in this motion. Councillor Singh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the comments made by Councillor Gazzola, but I would counter that his reference to the next item in relation to the honorarium for the EDI committee members. In some cases, timing is crucial. Important work does need to be moved forward. I think the mayor's advisory or the mayor's task force brought significant items forward in important work that needs to proceed. And that important work needs to be proceed not on the best basis of what our staff value or view as important, and those directions come to council, but more importantly, filtered and consulted with members of the community, especially the EDI committee members, ensuring that the work is in line with the best principles that came out of the recommendations from the task force. That's why it's important to move forward with the committee, and of course, in recognizing the honorarium for the work that, or the consultation that committee members would provide. In response to what Councillor Davey is doing, this is not necessarily just a housekeeping item. I don't see it that way. I don't want the public to view it that way, and I don't want our staff, more importantly, to view it that way. This is a cognitive approach, recognizing that we have not had a good reflective view of the great work that our citizens do in providing good feedback and opinion to this council. And it is time right now, in direction from this council, that we want to make sure that we are recognizing that important work and we're respecting their time and effort for that good work. And that's why I support this direction and the importance of that direction to bring back a report at the earliest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Singh. Any further comments on Councillor Davies' motion? If not, I too just want to thank Councillor Davey for bringing it forward. Well, I'm certainly pleased and will be supporting the motion that's coming into committee of the whole. I think it is important that we are doing a broader review of this issue with respect to all of our committees, and taking an equity lens approach to this issue going forward, and recognizing that in fact some of these committees have not been reviewed in, well, as long as I can remember, in terms of their what their honorariums are and so on. They've been in place for many years. So I think it is timely that we are taking a look at that and doing it comprehensively. So thank you, Councillor Davey, for bringing that forward. Councillor Gazzola, you had a comment already. Is there something new that you missed, or?
Yes, there is something new that I missed.
Okay,
I'm calling for a recorded vote on Councillor Davies' proposal. I will not be supporting it because I don't feel I feel we're doing the cart before the horse here. So I want to support the second item that comes forward. So I can't support this first item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will take a recorded vote. I'll start with Ward 1, Councillor Davey.
To the mayor?
Yes.
Sorry, to the mayor. Do we have a seconder for the motion?
Sorry, Councillor Singh. Thank you. So I'll do a recorded vote, starting with Ward 1, Councillor Davey.
Favor.
Ward 2, Councillor Schneider.
I'm in favor.
Ward 3, Councillor Gazzola.
Opposed.
Ward 4, Councillor Michaud.
In favor.
Ward 5, Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Ward 6, Councillor Singh.
In favor.
Ward 7, Councillor Ioannidis.
In favor.
Ward 8, Councillor Johnson.
In favor.
Ward 9, Councillor Chapman.
In favor.
Ward 10, Councillor Marsh.
In favor.
Thank you, and I'm in favor, so that does carry. Okay, that's it for new business. Item number 10, questions and answers. There being none, we'll then move on to the bylaws. Do I have a mover for the bylaws? Councillor Galloway-Seelock, seconded by Councillor Schneider. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Galloway-Seelock and seconded by Councillor Schneider that leave be given the mover and seconder to introduce the bylaws listed on the agenda. The same be taken as read a first and second time and stand referred to committee of the whole. Madam Clerk, are there any additional items before we take that vote?
To the mayor, there are no additional items.
Thank you very much. So with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. We'll now move on motion. Council resolve itself into committee of the whole to consider the agenda, and it will be chaired by Councillor Chapman. So Councillor Chapman, over to you.
Thank you. First, do we have a mover for the administrative report? Councillor Ioannidis. Any comments or questions for staff? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Do we have a mover for the caucus resolution?
I'll move that.
Mayor Vrbanovic. Does anyone have any questions or comments for staff? Go ahead, Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, are we going to provide the public with a little more detail on the caucus resolution? Do we
I would
not?
think it's what's in the package.
But we're not being very transparent. Can we not provide the public with a little more detail other than the one sentence there that we're approving? I don't see any problems with letting the public know. Okay, so.
Ms. Rabb, go ahead.
Certainly, I see Ms. More like Silk is on the call too, so I'll defer to her if I get this wrong, but council is approving an honoraria for members of the Equity, Anti-Racism and Indigenous Advisory Committee in the sum of $150 per meeting per person.
Thank you. That's all I was asking, that it be put on the table so everyone knows. Nothing wrong with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question and for the response. Are there any questions or any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Madam Clerk, are there any other items to be considered from caucus?
Through the chair to council, there is one item arising from a special council caucus earlier today. I will display that motion on the screen.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Can we have a mover? Councillor Ioannidis? Any comments or questions from council? Councillor Gazzola, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if someone could just give a little bit of explanation. It's an excellent recommendation, but I think it's a little vague, and I think we should be proud of what we're doing finally, and provide and let the public know what we're doing.
Ms. Rabb?
Thank you, through you, Councillor Chapman. Council has approved the parental and maternity leave top-up for management and non-union staff, consistent with the same approach that was approved for QP 791 staff late last year. So bear with me while I just pull up some specific details. So for this employee group, eligible employees who receive this will be eligible for payments up to 55% of their gross earnings, and a sub top-up of 20% equaling 75% of their base salary, and will receive it for maternity or pregnancy for 15-week maximum, and parental for a 10-week maximum. So that's the high-level overview, and essentially this is extending the same benefit that council approved for QP 791 staff to management and non-union employees. And so thank you, council, for your support of this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marsh.
I have no questions about that topic, but I'm wondering about the Committee of the Whole report on affordable housing development charge waivers. Did we deal with that and I missed it?
Was that in one of the committee reports rather than?
Yes, Madam Chair, we dealt with that earlier in the committee reports.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so no other comments. Councillor Gallo-Silat, go ahead.
Yeah, I just quickly want to state that I'm happy to see this here. I think it's a long time that we move in this direction, and so I appreciate staff bringing this forward.
Okay, thank you. So all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. It has been moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Marsh, that the proceedings and the recorded pecuniary interests and conflicts taken in the meeting of the Committee of the Whole held this date as attached here to and forming part of these minutes be hereby adopted and confirmed.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Do I have someone to move third readings of the bylaws? Moved by Councillor Galloway-Seelock, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And with that, just prior to adjourning, I do want to invite members of the public to join us on Thursday morning at 8 o'clock on YouTube or Facebook, or via the city's website for a live streaming of the State of the City 2022 State of the City speech. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Michaud, seconded by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Oh, and happy Easter to all those who are going to be celebrating this weekend.